Well, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning.
Good morning.
Everybody's kind of probably just gotten here, at least I did, about an hour ago, and settling in. I thought I'd put the challenge anyway. I'd like to know who came the farthest to get here to Virginia Beach today. And I'd like you guys to figure that out as a group. So I'll give you a minute to figure out who's come the farthest.
About 3 hours. Anybody out of state? All right.
So who's our winner? And where'd you come from?
Atlanta.
Welcome. Welcome to VSTE.
Yeah.
I figured out this is probably my 15th VSTE. I see a lot of familiar faces. I know some of you have been long time like me, so welcome to what promises to be a great conference. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Hendron. I work for Goochland County Public Schools, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about best practices for going one-to-one. In order for me to kind of know who I'm talking to, I'd like to know how many of you are in a district or a school right now that have a established one-to-one program. And
Established?
keep your hand up if this is the first year of it. Okay. How many of you are thinking about going one-to-one in your school district? Okay. And anybody been in a one-to-one program over 5 years? So you're exactly the kind of audience I wanted to talk to today about going one-to-one. I'm going to tell you where I get some of the information to share with you today. I had the opportunity to work with these colleagues this past year, on the last year of our dissertation for our doctorate. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that experience because it was a unique experience. If anybody's thinking about or has gone through a doctoral program, it's a little different. It was through VCU. It was an ED in leadership. And one of the things that makes that program different is that you do a group project for a real-world client instead of a traditional dissertation. And my background, I've been doing instructional technology for the past 15 years, and I was lucky to get a project that dealt with technology. My 3 colleagues there are all school administrators, and so it wasn't necessarily in their back pocket of expertise, but nevertheless, they chose to work with me on this particular project because it was of interest to them. We have Shania Tolliver on the left, Derek Deloach, Angie Kim. Shania and Derek both work for Henrico County Public Schools. Derek is a middle school assistant principal. Shania is an elementary principal. Angie Kim now works for Chesterfield County Public Schools. She previously worked for Henrico. She is an elementary assistant principal. And my position in Goochland is now Director of Innovation and Strategy. And our dissertation won a national award this past October. There are over 100 schools of education that belong to CPED, the Carnegie Project on the Education Doctorate. It's the first time a non-traditional dissertation won the award, so we were pleased to get that recognition. The VCU program, again, pits you into this position to work on a real-world project. And you don't get to pick the project necessarily. The project picks you. VCU puts out RFPs to area organizations. They're not all K-12 districts. And they say, what do you need help with research on? And the professors screen those and then give us a plate from which to choose, and we choose one. And so for us, over a year ago, in the summer, 2013, Chesterfield County Public Schools was one of the RFPs. Chesterfield is one of the largest school districts in Virginia, the largest in central Virginia. And they were considering doing a one-to-one program. And they came to VCU and said, we need help with best practices of how to roll out a one-to-one program. It's going to be millions of dollars. It's going to be high visibility by the community. We've seen what's happened around us before. We don't want a repeat of the Henrico laptop sale, which there are still t-shirts out there that says I survived the sale of the iBooks when the run-up sale was just being cool. So it was understandable they wanted some help with that. To let you know a little bit about Chesterfield and what they were going after, they were going to start with middle school deployment of Chromebooks. They had made a decision after research in-house of what the best device for them would be. They want to eventually scale it up. So so it's grades 3 through 12. Next year they'll be doing high schools all at once. A lot of Chromebooks. The first thing they're interested in is what other forms in what they would call administrivia were the districts using to launch their one-to-one. They're interested in best practices, professional development. They wanted to see what other districts were doing. They had already hired a company to assess the readiness of the district. Now, Chesterfield being a huge district, they want to make sure they have the bandwidth, the networking, the infrastructure, and that outfit will do that for you. They wanted to look at SOL scores as one of the things they did to measure the program. And then they came to us and says, can you help us out? So for most of the projects that happen at VCU, if Chesterfield needs help, you go to Chesterfield, you do research, and you give them a product. Chesterfield didn't want research done. They wanted to know best practices. So our solution was to do a multi-case study. We're going to go to different districts who had already done one-to-one programs, find out what worked and what didn't work, and make those suggestions to Chesterfield. You with me so far? So now I'm going to share with you what we learned from talking to 5 of the districts who've gone one-to-one. It's a qualitative study, so we talked to people, we interviewed people, we got the inside scoop on what was going on. We worked with 5 school districts. 4 of them were in Virginia, 1 of them was outside of Virginia. They had diverse deployments, and I'll talk about that diversity in a little bit. We did a process of data collection, not only through documents, AUPs, other policies that the districts were using, but also those forms that Chesterfield wanted, and also interviews with key stakeholders. We held interviews and focus groups with leaders in those districts, from superintendents, tech directors, ITRTs, tech support folks, curriculum directors, and no teachers or students. And that was just to keep the focus of the study down a little bit. And I mentioned document analysis, kind of going through and sifting through. As you might imagine, you go to talk to school districts, some are more open than others. Some we had to pester a few more than others to get what we wanted. But it was a fun process. What made this process unique in writing a dissertation, if you're doing a PhD, you can basically take a good chunk of time, work at your own pace. This had to be done within a year. And so while I had the help of 3 colleagues to do the research and to write the dissertation, it had to be done within the year. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We had 3 primary research questions that informed what I'm going to tell you about today. And the first is, what policies and procedures do districts have to support their one-to-one programs? And we called it a computing initiative. Second is, what professional development efforts really helped promote success from deployment and through with instructional goals for the program. And the last big catch-all question, what challenges did districts identify? So I talked about the diversity of our districts. Again, we talked to 5 different districts. The student population among districts ranged on the low end of 2,500 students to the high end of 48,000. So big diversity in student populations. The type of devices they deployed was different. In District 1, they had done traditional laptops. 2 was iPads and laptops. 3 was iPads. 4 was iPads, and the 5th was Chromebooks. We thought diversity was good because we didn't want something focused just on one particular platform. And we knew Chesterfield wanted Chromebooks, but we wanted our research to be able to really help anybody, not just Chesterfield. The grade levels differed amongst the deployments. In some districts, it was middle and high school. Some started with elementary and had an elementary take-home. You can see the diversity there. The experience level of these districts varied. We had one district with over 10 years of experience with one-to-one. We had others, like some of you in the room, who just got started that particular school year. And so how to do it was really fresh in their minds. And then we found differences, although subtle, in the focus, the vision of the program. And we tried to summarize it in just as few words as possible here. But in the first one, it was limiting the digital divide. The second was digital curriculum with textbooks. We want to replace what we're doing with paper with something that's more convenient. The third was equity among learners, increased engagement. So there's some tie over to number 1. Teacher pedagogy, deeper learning. And the last one was student-centered pedagogy, very similar to District 4. And one of the things we learned, if we're going to explain to somebody how do you do a one-to-one program, we came up with something kind of technical called a logic model, but it's just basically a blueprint of the steps that these districts collectively, if you were to take all the processes they went through, how did they start a one-to-one program? There's 5 stages we identified. The first stage is called discovery, and that's where you assess and articulate the needs. It's like, why would we go one-to-one? For those of you that are considering one-to-one, if you're not thinking about what you want to solve with the one-to-one, that's a warning sign, because usually this one-to-one is a solution to a problem you articulate. The second one is some research. In the literature, you'll see it called ubiquitous computing, meaning that technology is everywhere, so we adopted that. It also sounded pretty high and mighty as a big word, so we liked it. Ubiquitous computing. You research. You go to other districts, you find out what's going on. The second stage, once you've made the decision, I'm going to do this, we're going to do this together, is you establish a vision. We were told over and over again, particularly in one district, but not only in that one district, that establishing a strong vision was one of the most important things you could do to sustain the one-to-one program. And you notice we took an arrow across, because the vision drives everything you do once it's established. The second part of the planning stage is making some decisions. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to get these things out there? How are we going to start thinking about professional development? And then, although all districts did not do it at this stage, they all told us that they should have. So that's why we changed the color there. You should establish how you're going to measure the success of the program. And districts took different ways of doing that. The preparation stage is next, where you update policies to support your program. You got to look at discipline, you got to look at acceptable use policies, you got to look at what's happening, maybe not in a school board policy type of policy, but what's happening in individual schools, so everybody's on the same page of how this is going to work. You're going to deploy devices to teachers ahead of students. Every district did that, and I'll show you they didn't do it all with the same amount of lead time. Professional development starts. In some cases, the professional development is delivered differently for administrators. And in some cases, administrators got the professional development ahead of the teachers. They were testing the waters. If they passed the litmus test, then the professional development went to teachers. And then, this is a big one for any of you in the tech department, upgrading your infrastructure. And as much as you can do ahead of time is great, you're still going to be tweaking it once the devices go out there. There's going to be unknowns that pop up that happen in every one of the 5 cases. Deployment is the big thing on here. I should have made it bigger or somehow made it stand out. But deployment is when students get devices. We carried professional development across because we thought not only was it important, but that's what the districts did. They carried it across. And that's when you begin to see changes in teaching paradigms. You should see changes. Otherwise, why did you get the technology? One of the pieces of advice I've been sharing with folks for about the last 8 years is a study from 2006 that's actually proved across 9,000 schools that if you don't change pedagogy, all the money you're spending on technology does not make a difference towards changing student achievement. And so I knew that going in, but you saw districts who were expecting changes because they bought these new devices. The evaluation portion really should happen behind the scenes at each one of these stages, and that's why we took the blue evaluation and put it behind. But districts all did a formal evaluation process after deployment. And that should be an assessment against the measures you established during the planning stage. In some cases, this was so formal that districts hired outside agencies to come in and conduct a formal evaluation or a program review of the program. Many districts start small and then scale it up. I described Chesterfield starting with middle school this year. Next year they're going to high school. So they're going to repeat the process. And I'll tell you, they'll probably make some changes based on what they've learned the first time around. And then the third part, during evaluation, and this happens throughout the whole thing, you're getting formal and informal feedback. You're going to teachers and saying what's working, what's not working. You're going to hear about what's not working. You're going to talk to parents, you're going to talk to students. And then behind all of that, districts told us how important communication was. And some learned this the hard way. They made the mistakes of not communicating adequately with all their stakeholder groups. But the ones we identified were parents, community partners, teachers, district and school leaders, and the media. Media was a big one that not everybody thought about, but everybody agreed with us. Yeah, you gotta get this out in front of the media. You sell it by selling your vision. Why are you doing this? Why are you going to spend the money? Get out there before any problems might arise. And then after all that, you repeat the process as you scale up the program. That's the process we saw at play across the 5 districts we talked to. So now I'd like to share with you some of the findings. Through discovery, folks were concerned about academic preparation. Are kids ready for the future? There was a desire from the districts to change instructional practices. Thinking about 21st century skills, about workplace readiness, worried about having technology skills themselves. They wanted kids prepared for the future. They wanted to combat the digital divide. They realized they had economic disparity in their community. They wanted to try to help erase that, at least by providing equal access to devices and the internet. Leadership came into play. Talking to principals, is this really what we want to do? Is this really a solution for you and your school? And so many districts talked about the reason they went ahead and did it is because they had good previous experience with technology ventures. One district had tried one-to-one. Some of you are old enough to remember the Apple eNate computers. They were little Newton-esque things, like a Palm Pilot. They had tried that in the late 90s. Didn't carry it forth too far, but they had a really positive experience and got excitement from people, and they kind of channeled that energy again when they did their deployment with iPads. And then research. People going out and looking things up online. Finding websites where folks have talked about their experiences. The planning stage requires leadership. Going through this ourselves, I'll tell you about the Goochland experience towards the end, but getting everybody on the same page about what you want to do takes some time. Developing a clear vision. We found that if you can't articulate what the vision is, you have to think it's this. If it doesn't really just roll off your tongue, that's a problem. People need to assess their instructional needs. What are we really good at? What do we need help with? How are we going to pay for it? If any of you are familiar with Mark Edwards in Mooresville, North Carolina, he does a pretty good job in his book about really breaking down about how they paid for it. He got lots of grants. He stopped buying things like paper. He says copiers are costing us money, and move that money over to the one-to-one program. You're going to have to give some things up more than likely if you want to pay for this. Selecting a platform. This was an interesting one. I learned more about this reading through the literature than actually from our districts. We asked the question, why did you choose the iPads? Why did you choose laptops? Why did you choose Chromebooks? The districts will tell you that we went through a process of trying to find the right device, but it usually aligns with the preferences of the folks in the technology department. For us, we've been an Apple district since 1997. We did our one-to-one with iPads. We're speaking the same language in terms of a platform. We also like the portability of a device like this. It wouldn't have made sense for us to have Mac-using teachers for all those years and then go buy Windows laptops. Selecting which grade levels you're going to start this with and which grade levels you want to completely go across the board with it. And just establishing and finding the time in everybody's busy schedules to actually launch this. Again, in the Mooresville book, Edwards will tell you that he spent a couple years once he got there planning for this process of doing a one-to-one. Of course, his was district-wide. His district is not a huge district, but it is bigger than Goochland, so that was important for us as we thought about things. During preparation, leadership also came up. In all our interviews, people brought up the need for leadership. People were getting the resources, networking, the devices themselves, looking at the policies, parental responsibilities, having those conversations with parents. What happens when the device gets broken? What happens if it goes missing? Are we going to have an insurance program? All the districts we looked at do have an insurance program or something where a fee is collected to cover replacement costs. They deployed to administrators to get them familiar. In some cases, these districts, this is one of the first times they actually gave a device to a teacher or administrator to take home. And then, as I mentioned before, professional development. Updating your infrastructure. You want to maximize your bandwidth to the buildings and schools. What a lot of folks didn't realize, they didn't understand wireless capacity within a building. They had a really nice fast pipe to the internet. They really hadn't considered the choke on the internal or local area network. And so investments had to be made there. Luckily, there's so many schools and businesses now deploying this that the expertise is out there with the vendors that you may be working with. In the one district who's been doing this 10 years did it. This was the first time that a wireless network had been constructed at this scale. And it was the largest wireless network in the United States. It was larger than anything the government had at that time in that district with 48,000 students. Setting expectations is really important with all stakeholders about what you're going to do. All of our districts held something called a deployment night. And this is when the kids got the devices. They invite parents, they talk to the parents, they do training. Chesterfield did theirs differently. They had optional training for parents. They invited them, they lured them to the school in the evening with free pizza. It was donated by one of the vendors. And they just handed the devices to kids at school. And I'll tell you from my experience of deploying iPads this year, you can do that with Chromebooks and it works. But we heard over and over from so many districts how important it was to have conversations with parents. So we thought it was important to mimic that and have a deployment night ourselves. Collecting fees. A lot of folks do insurance. Goochland chose to do self-insurance. So we asked for $35 to cover one breakage or replacement, multiple breakages throughout the year. It worked really well for us. The first year we had 2 breakages. But as a guide, vendors will tell you that you can expect between 0.5 and 1% breakages per day of your deployed base. If you do the math, if your vendor is offering you a warranty program, it's best to look into it and decide, is that something we can cover or is it something we want help from parents? The alternatives for us are the kid gets to use the device but not take it home if they haven't paid the insurance fee. We have a couple of kids who couldn't. We've also waived the fee for kids who don't have an ability to pay. Student training is important. Today's kids probably know the iPad inside and out and don't need a lot of technical training in terms of how the device works. That doesn't mean they all know how to use it. And in this case, you can really use other kids in your school to help with this piece of it. And it's also a good time when it's in their hands to talk about expectations for how you want it to be used. Infrastructure is usually being tweaked in terms of networking. Again and again, when we talk to folks about what happens during deployment, leadership was important. Changing instruction, giving examples for teachers, and providing that professional development, and also support. In every district we talked to, they had a role like an ITRT. They don't all call them ITRTs. Sometimes we decided in our report to call them technology coaches because it lent itself to not being a fix-it person. In every case, the coach was a critical role for making a one-to-one program work once devices were out there. So if any of you in the audience are ITRTs, your role is indispensable for making a one-to-one program work. We talked about how deployment changed among the districts, and so the numbers that you see in the circles relate to the district number. So you can see District 1 did not deploy devices very far out for administrators. They did it right before the student deployment. District 4 had a 2-year head start for their deployment to administrators. For administrator professional development, that happened before the devices went out for District 1, which is a little unusual. They actually used desktop PCs to do that. It just gives you an idea of the variety. The literature tells you it should be a year or more in advance. So the diagram kind of illustrates for you that everybody didn't take the advice of what folks in the literature have said are best practices. People ranked this up pretty quickly once they decided to do it. Derek, when we gave our defense, Derek told you about evaluation. That's why his picture's up there. I thought I'd leave him up there so you could saw that. I didn't do all this myself. Setting expectations. We heard people say, we talked about expectations. We had expectations, but we had to reestablish them once we went around it, and keep talking to folks about that. Deployment night was a good sense. After that happened, you assess how it went, because many people do more than one deployment night, usually by school. And so mistakes will happen. We learned that. We had various experiences at our different deployment nights that we couldn't really foresee, but they happened. I'll tell you a little more about those in a moment. Collecting fees happens. How well does that go? How well do folks account for that? Student training, you can account for that. Infrastructure, leadership capacity, all those things we just talked about should be evaluated. And our districts did that in formal and informal ways. And what's most important is that when you're talking to constituents, like the school board members, concerned parents, having that data in your back pocket is very powerful. I know it's not going well from your perspective. However, our data shows us that most people are very pleased with how this has been rolled out. In Goochland, we did a parent survey, and as any of those of you who do parent surveys or have experience with those, we got a total of 9 respondents. So I don't use that data because we had one person who replied who was very happy. The others were the ones who were not happy. And so at least I knew 8 people were not happy, and those were probably the 8 people in our community that weren't happy. It's just one of those things where if things are going well, people don't feel they want to give you the time of day. And so you have to come up with some creative ways of doing it. And one way is we thought about this year is when folks are coming back for the second year in a row of doing this, you start asking them some questions. What do you want to see us change this year? It's another time to engage. Because you talk to people, they want to give you their opinion. But the reality is people are busy, so we can't blame them really. Because we know how that is too. Communication. We saw instances where internal communication was pretty poor, caused a lot of problems for districts. That happens among the schools, happens with your school board. In one case, school board had a change. I think 3 or 4 of the members of the school board changed, and the new version of the board started questioning the whole program and almost derailed one of the district's programs. So it's very important whenever you have leadership changes, either the superintendent, technology director, or school board, that you revisit that vision, reevaluate it, talk about what's going right, so you can maintain a program and keep it established. Externally, talking to the media about it, getting articles in the paper. Hopefully you don't have an expose where somebody's coming into a building and pointing out what's going wrong with something. Hopefully you never have a stampede with laptops again. I live in Henron County, so that was real for me in terms of coming on the evening news. And the at-large community. We think of parents. One of our districts, they really wanted us to work. And so the technology director made appointments with the director of economic development for the county, sat down with that gentleman, went over what they were going to do with their program. The guy had never seen an iPad before. This after they first came out, really talked them through what they wanted. Then they met with each individual members of the board of supervisors for that county, sat down with them, and really went one-on-one to talk about and to demonstrate what they wanted to accomplish in their district. So recommendations. This is what we came up with after talking with folks. This is what we want to make sure Chesterfield heard. Providing time for planning and research. You got to have the time to think about this, think it through. Of course, you can overdo it as well. But the literature says you want to start at least a year planning, thinking, tinkering with the devices. Just to give you an idea again, the amount of planning time that was given among the districts. District 1 spent 2 years planning for their deployment. The shortest one was District 2. They implemented very quickly. The reason they deployed it very quickly is because they had received grant money that wasn't expected, and they were said, "Can you do it?" And they said, "Sure, we'll do it. It's exciting." Wow. 4 months from now, we're handing out iPads to kids. I mentioned this before. You have to establish and sustain a vision, and it will direct everything you do in the project. And again, looking at those different visions across the districts, I used a few more words here to kind of get at what people were doing. These are things that can take years. This is not what you want next year. This is not what you want 2 years from now. This is what you want maybe after a decade of doing this, so that it can sustain changes in leadership. It's got to be vague enough, high enough, 30,000-foot view of what you really want to do, handing out all these devices to kids. The slow part is not the kids using the technology. The slow part is the change in pedagogy, the way people are teaching, and the ways in which kids can learn. Got to get stakeholder support. We've got to talk about this in the community. Got to check your infrastructure. As we visited the schools, in one district we went to a school and actually visited and saw what was happening in the classrooms. The network folks were there, and that was their 4th year deployment. They were still doing upgrades. They still had local network upgrades to do to maximize their use of bandwidth that was available. The PD. Everybody's going to provide staff development. But the difference here, and the reason we wrote this way, a lot of PD is about the device. Now, I'm fortunate to work in Goochland where we've had very strong technology integration for over 10 years. Our devices were kind of new for the teachers. We had iPads, but not all the teachers have used the iPads, or our students have used the iPads. But I spent no time of my professional development time with those teachers talking about the iPad. I had them in hand, but they were discovering how to use it as we went through it. If they had questions, I made them figure it out themselves. Just like I made you guys figure out who traveled here the furthest. Because literally, if you watch the video of the 1-year-old and the 91-year-old on YouTube using an iPad, we didn't need to waste time. People that disparity in age can figure out how to use an iPad. In Goochland since 2008, I've been talking about 21st century skills. This model is the latest research from Punya Mishra and his team at Michigan State. They wanted to answer the question, what the heck is 21st century skills all about? You ask different people, they have different answers. And so what they did is they looked at 25 different frameworks of 21st century learning. Everything from the Partnership for 21st Century Skills to Howard Gardner and all other kinds of familiar names you're probably familiar with. And this is the model that came up with, kind of like we did our logic model for how you do a one-to-one. They came that there were 3 clusters of knowledge people were interested in. And if you look where standards are, it's the top, core content knowledge. It puts in perspective all the other things that we should be spending our time with. So our teachers in Goochland weren't really new to these ideas, but I said this is the reason we're doing our one-to-one. The other thing is providing adequate support. You should talk to districts who are successful with one-to-one, find out how many ITRPs they have, find out how many technicians they have, and make sure you're in that ballpark for providing support. And if you can't yet provide it, think of measures of how you're going to prove to your superintendent or school board the next year that you need more support. That's what we've just gone through. Superintendent just told me to hire another tech person, which we're really happy about. Policies and procedures. You don't want to be figuring this out after devices are out in kids' hands. You're doing exactly what Chesterfield did and said, hey, Goochland, what are you doing? Henrico, what are you doing? Virginia Beach, what are you doing? And going out there and shaking people's hands and saying, how did you make this work? It's not a bad idea. Evaluation criteria. You will get challenges from people in the community who do not believe in this or do not believe in the money that's being spent and want to know how you're going to prove it works. I'll tell you a little bit more about how we're doing that, which is different from what Chesterfield told us. Establishing reliable funding sources. Just to give you an idea of how districts paid for their technology in different ways. District 1 paid for it outside the operating budget and purchased their devices. District 2 had state e-textbook funds and stimulus grant funds and purchased their devices. District 3 leased the devices. District 4 purchased the devices through textbook funding. And the 5th also did operating budget and leased theirs. There's lots of different ways to do it. One of the quotes we came across in doing our research that kind of resonated with me, Steve Jobs, who was obviously an Apple guy, I'm a fan, some of what he's done, was this idea of the condor. And he read this article in Scientific American magazine in the 70s. He started talking about the article in the 80s in connection with computers. And his point was that the article went to find out who was the most efficient species on Earth in terms of locomotion and efficiency of energy. And the condor is the most efficient animal out there. The authors were surprised. They expected it to be a human. So they redid the calculations and they did some measurements of a human being on a bicycle and found out that when you add the bicycle to the human capacity, that it outdid the condor. And that led to Jobs talking about computers as bicycles for the mind. That it was this tool that enabled us to really catapult our capacity as thinkers and creators. I visited this museum in France. It has all kinds of tools in it, and of course I spent some time when I saw the computer case and recognized a few of the old models in there. I saw this Lisa, and that was the computer where Jobs first started talking about a bicycle for the mind. And it really kind of resonated with us when we think, why are we giving these devices to kids? We want to give them a tool that's going to catapult their capacity for thinking and creativity. And it also made us go back and say, where did all this one-to-one stuff come from? A lot of people don't know that Seymour Papert, who's seated there on the left, came up with the idea of a one-to-one in 1980 when he was giving a report to then President Carter. It was right before Reagan became president. And he foresaw that computer technology would be so cheap in just a few years, decades, that you could hand an individual computer to a student. And what they were planning to do with computers at the time is markedly different from what we're doing now. There was no internet for kids to connect to. The computer is going to be used to problem solve, to program. One of his associates, who in the 70s was working for Xerox PARC, where Ethernet was invented, Alan Kay, came up with the idea of using a small portable computer. That's his prototype that he went home after he thought it up. He used cardboard and rubber cement and put this together. And I actually saw this prototype when I visited the Computer History Museum this past summer in California. They kept it. It looks like an iPad with a keyboard connected to it. And again, it's in the 70s. And he envisioned this computer, this portable computer, being used not by adults, but by kids to learn. So it took us a while. But in 2001, not only was Steve Jobs in Henrico County in Virginia for the first one-to-one, he also went to the state of Maine, where they did it for all middle school students, with Governor King. We had Nicholas Negroponte, who was like Papert, was at MIT, who started the One Laptop per Child project, trying to produce an inexpensive computer for kids in third world countries. We had Mark Edwards, who's in Mooresville, probably one of the most famous superintendents right now for doing one-to-one. He's now done it twice on a big scale. And the last picture we put in there is of today's students who are bringing their own devices to school and are educating us about the incredible things they can do with this technology. And now I'd like to change gears a little bit and tell you about my experience in a one-to-one program in Goochland. As I mentioned earlier, we started with iPads last year. If you don't know where Goochland is, it's located just west of Richmond. We are up against Henrico to the east. We go along 64 to the north and the James River to the south. We have just 5 schools, 3 elementary, 1 middle, 1 high. We have about 2,500 students. And if you were to drive through Goochland, you would consider it rural, although the government doesn't. And it's been a regional top performer in terms of SOL scores. That's Goochland. We chose iPads, as I mentioned. We've been an Apple district since '97. That's when the first big infusion of technology came to Goochland, Virginia. One of the reasons we chose Apple at that time, I was not there, but as I was told, was they were considering building a Motorola factory in Goochland. And Motorola was the brand of chips that went into Macintosh. So we were trying to persuade Motorola to come to this Apple-friendly county right outside Richmond. We had already purchased, like so many of your schools, small amounts of iPads. We experimented with them, saw what they were all about. We had them in carts and realized that wasn't ideal because they're really for personal use, rather than not being sharing like a laptop can be. We already had a management system in place, Jamf Casper, to manage these devices. And we really liked the strong app catalog that came with an iPad and the Apple App Store. We also love the fact that these things are portable. They have dual microphones, dual cameras in them. It's basically a big cell phone, some people say, but that's pretty cool in the hands of a kid. One of the things that I've seen now that we've passed these out to kids, these go on field trips with kids. They're able to capture the field trip experience with video and audio clips. They come back to class and they're able to use that for some really neat things that people are learning. We also went through the process of developing a new strategic plan. And that sounds boring, but for us, the strategic plan is not something we created just to put on the shelf and say, yep, we have a strategic plan. 6 years we'll go and see how we did. We want to use this thing every day. It's our roadmap. Our strategic plan has 3 goal areas. The first one, which best relates to the one-to-one program, is preparing students for life through deeper learning. We'll talk in a minute what I mean by that. We also want to improve our school climate and have safe schools with effective management. Our first objective, each of these goal areas has 3 objectives. The first one is focused on the deeper learning. I wrote it out here so you could see the whole thing. All students will experience high levels of engagement, enjoyment, and personalization. Personalization for us means it's individualized, but it goes beyond that. It's easy today to individualize learning for kids. If I hand you each a device, you can each be involved in an activity that's individualized for you. I can go into the computer and say, you're getting one activity, you're getting another activity, you're getting something a little rigorous, you're getting something less rigorous. That's pretty cool to be able to do that. Personalization means it's personal to the student, that they're taking something of themselves into the learning activity. To get there, we have a number of strategies, including instructional innovation plan and one-to-one technology. This is the slide I told you about before. I show it to everybody in almost every presentation because it's so profound. You don't change what learning looks like for students, technology will not make a significant difference. That was across 35,000 teachers, 9,000 schools. It's a profound thing to think about. Part of that for me in experimenting, because I'm the one that's supposed to be the innovator, the changer in our district, I went to several classrooms. I said, I want to change your classroom if you will give me permission to partner with you and change it into a 21st century classroom. It sounded like you're going to get something good at that, right? It sounded like I was going to spend some money. So the first thing I did is took away all the chairs, because that's what our classrooms look like. Even though that's a one-room schoolhouse from a century ago, I didn't want the organization of the room to dictate how we learn, where everyone does the same thing at the same time together. We had classrooms that looked like this. The furniture's new, it's brighter, we've replaced the chalkboard with a projector and a screen. But gosh, we didn't change much. We still had kids learning the same things at the same time together. We think about how students learn, and on this graph I'm going to show you skill level and rigor level, or a challenge. Sometimes we really do not a great job at making sure that we match a student's abilities with a task that we give them. There's a mismatch. The task is either too easy, too hard. We might get it just right. We might get in good alignment. That's the individualization part that I talked about earlier. But sometimes the student's skill level is so high, what we're asking of them is so low that the students are what? They're sitting there bored. It's no wonder we have discipline problems when we put a device in their hand and we give them something that they're bored with. It's not because they're stupid. It's because it's not engaging them. And of course, we can do the opposite as well, and that happens a lot. So this whole model reminded me of another diagram I saw, and so I redrew that one. And it comes from this idea of flow. And I first learned about flow when I was getting my first master's degree in Cleveland to be a music education teacher. I was taking a class in creativity. The book was an awesome book. I still use the book because it was just the most awesome textbook I ever had. It's written by a guy named Michael Davis, who was at the University of Wisconsin. And inside, he talks about this concept of flow as a model of getting in the creative process. If you get into flow, it's when you're working on something. It could be at a computer, it could be a painting, it could be a musical composition, it doesn't matter. You look outside, you notice it's dark already. Time has just gone by and you've been totally immersed in this process. To me, that's one of the deepest forms of learning a student could approach. I thought, how can we get this in schools? I've been thinking about this for years. So the guy that came up with this concept is Nahtali Csikszentmihalyi. He's a Russian, and there is a TED Talk with Mihaly in it, if you're interested. And the thing is, this describes a creative process, and you have to give significant time to it. So you're not going to get this necessarily in a 40-minute period of time with kids in a music class in elementary school. So we have to start thinking about creative ways of getting to this idea of flow and giving significant time to it, where students can have extended focus and we can approach deeper learning. Because what happens is we mess with skill and cognitive level, if we don't quite hit the right spot, students feel in control of everything, which is not necessarily bad. Or if it's down there, they're starting to feel relaxed, so this is easy, this is no big deal. As you guys said, they might become bored, apathetic. If the skill level is too high, they become worried, anxious. How do we do that? In Goochland, since 2008, we've been doing a G21 project that's required of all of our teachers each year. It's a project-based framework that I've put together. At its core was this focus on students creating something or creative performance. We encourage multidisciplinary approaches to this. We had a Latin teacher and an art teacher come together. They did their project together with their two classes. Today, if you go to our auditorium at our high school, there's this awesome mosaic mural that's a permanent fixture on the wall that mimics the James River, that was a cross-collaboration of understanding the culture of Pompeii and our current, our location within Virginia. Those students had an awesome collaborative experience doing that. The way we started this in Goochland was for somebody to meet with each individual teacher and plan their project. That was me. I've met with every single teacher for a number of years, along with their instructional technology coach, ITRT, and their building principal. I record all these plans in a database. At the end of the year, principals would assess the projects with teachers. And each August at our convocation, we give awards out to teachers for having most outstanding projects. So this is something that's been in our instructional culture that was easy to take into a vision of why we were doing one-to-one. I also mentioned deeper learning. The Hewlett Foundation has an excellent online guide of what I mean by deeper learning. We've customized it a little bit, as you might imagine. For us, deeper learning takes some of what's there and also infuses it with some Goochland culture. Students are still mastering core content. We don't finish that. We start with that. We give students daily practice in 21st century skills. That's the goal. We move towards students being co-designers of their learning. And along the way, we're developing an academic mindset. For us, deeper learning allows us to focus on a student's individual needs. When I have a device for each kid and I have backed it up with a learning management system, in our case we use Schoology, it enables me to individualize. It provides that basis, those tools, the device, the learning management system, third-party apps, provide a basis for that project-based learning. So it's not a once-a-year thing, it's an ongoing thing. It helps us focus our assessment on going beyond achievement and focusing on student progress and growth. And so with that, there's lots of reasons why people may be thinking going to one-to-one, or why you guys in the room have started a one-to-one experience. You'll hear people, you'll hear vendors tell you about anytime, anywhere learning. Maybe. It's also anytime, anywhere gameplay. If you don't have the internet, you might be hard-pressed to get there. It's not a bad goal, I'm not making fun of that. To gain access to the internet, to get something from the internet. And one of the things I read said, when you connect a student to the internet, you're connecting them to the world's largest library that ever you conceive of. And that's true. There's a lot of responsibility involved with giving access to that library. There's also a lot of learning that takes place in how to get to the things that are important. Another thing that's very important is equity of access. I mentioned that so many districts were concerned about that, at least as the most prominent feature or as a secondary feature of why they're doing the one-to-one. But I would challenge each of you to go back to Seymour Papert's book from the 80s called The Children's Machine, where he gives a vision for why you put technology in a student's hand. And he wasn't necessarily talking about a one-to-one. He was probably talking about the Apple IIe that was currently in schools in the United States. He's the co-inventor of the Logo programming language, if you remember the turtle. He believed that when teaching a student to code, you were teaching them a process for thinking. It's a little deeper than just giving access today to the internet. His concern was creation, tinkering, and the positive connotations we have with this idea of hacking. And for us in our discovery for Chesterfield and in my own exploration in Goochland, going back to the roots of the ideas of why you would give this to a student really has profoundly impacted not only our vision, but our professional development, the conversations we're having with our school board, and the conversations we're having with the public. We've taken our dissertation, we've edited it a little bit so it's a little easier to use. We've made it into a free iPad book. And if you're interested, you can search for my last name on the iTunes store, or you can use this QR code to access, if you have an iPad, to get access to the book and read more details of our study. And I'll also take any questions you may have. Yes?
How did some of these districts approach lack of accessibility in the home, lack of internet accessibility in the home?
Some of them pointed out free public Wi-Fi access in their community. McDonald's, Panera's, they were somewhat, I wouldn't say urban, they're suburban enough that they had those types of resources. One district was also putting Wi-Fi in buses, strategically parking them after hours and enabling that access to students. Another district partnered with local provider. This is the district that had the most experience during the modem era, and providing inexpensive dial-up service. So they kind of negotiated that for families. And some admit they don't have the capacity to deal with it right now, and they chose an iPad in particular because you didn't need the internet to use the device. Obviously it does more with the internet, but students would never require it when they go home. Any other questions? Yes.
What have the divisions thought about, like a replacement plan, like how they're going to? Because obviously these devices aren't going to last forever.
So you'll talk about the cycle of the device. It typically is 3 to 4 years. In one case, a district had iPads. They were planning on 3. They were finding out the third year they were still kind of going strong, so they were stretching it. Chesterfield, for instance, it's a 3-year. They've got the plan that in 3 years they do another cycle of Chromebooks. What happens, however, is when it's not totally thought out, and sometimes that's just reality, how you're going to pay for it each cycle. So things would change once one cycle is over because they had to find different funding sources. So that could be a challenge. But usually it's a good idea to think about in advance when you're doing this, how are you going to do it? And typically, operating budget's great if you can do that because you have a fixed cost of what they're going to cost. You know, the price of technology has only been going down. One of the reasons that so many districts, including those that are represented by you in the room today, are thinking about one-to-one is because these devices are about half the cost or less of a laptop. And so that it becomes actually feasible that now that you can do this. So leasing is the other thing that people do, and with lease you're kind of building in that cycle into the thing because every 3 or 4 years you're refreshing the technology. Yes?
You stated that in all the cases that the instructional technology coach was a vital role within the successful launch. What things did that instructional technology coach do that made that so successful, other than professional development?
First thing people told us, they were there. So when I was afraid to try to ask the kids to pull out the devices, that person was there and said it's going to be okay, some hand-holding. Professional development obviously was a big part of it, but it wasn't always in the context of a workshop that you might think of as a formal training. In one district, they found that teachers did not want formalized 2-hour workshops after school. What they wanted instead and requested from the ITRTs and the principals were what they call snacks. And the snacks were short 15 to 20 minute sessions, as they said, on my way to my car in the parking lot. And those informal sessions gave a lot of teachers just enough to go the next mile with stuff. The third thing that really came out was modeling. So I know how to use the device, I figured all that out, but I want you to show me what you mean, whether it's deeper learning, whether it's student-centered, whether it's building inquiry rails. The ITRT was able to demonstrate that with kids and model what they were going after. Those are the big 3 things I remember.
Almost like the index card version of experiences of leasing versus buying. Like we do a lot of like Title I funding purchases. And I know there's a lot involved in the changes by like different quotes and stuff, but what's like the easiest thing that you could take away from leasing versus buying?
In a lease, you're going to pay what's like using your credit card. You're going to pay for the ability to purchase a bunch of stuff at once and pay it off over time. So it's like that APR on your credit card. In Goochland, we found that in our past leases, we've got a 0% or a negative APR because the technology that we're handing back at the end of the lease is of such value that we get credit. And so that would be advantageous if you're using technology that has a high resale value. For us, it's MacBooks. in our discussions now, because we're getting ready to do a lease, they've told us that if we went with Chromebooks, there would be no residual value after 3 years. So that is of interest to you to know what you're, talk to your lease provider and see what residual value has traditionally been associated with devices that you're trying to get. The thing with ownership is if you have like a 3-year cycle on your technology and it's after 3 years, a lot of schools won't get rid of it, they'll hold on to it and use it with other populations. So for us, traditionally what we've done is we've taken high school iMacs that were brand new at one point, and after a refresh cycle, they're now at the elementary school and classroom as those extra computers that are there for stations. So thinking about which technology you want to repurpose in your district or school can be an option for you to purchase. But you literally got to sit down with a spreadsheet, work some things out, and what always complicates it is it's Title I, and you can't really repurpose that for a purpose other than Title I, so you're kind of stuck with some stuff there. Getting creative. Folks, I'm out of time. If anybody wants to stay behind, ask me some questions, feel free to do so. Thank you for coming. Have a great day.